Constructive Criticism is sponsored by Oasis Games. MTGOasis.com is the place to get cards for your next Magic event. Try them out with code CCMTG for 15% off of your first order, and use the code WouldThatBeGood for 4% off of every order. Want to support the show directly? Head on over to patreon.com/CCMTG to check out some awesome benefits and future goals for the show. Thanks for listening, and here's this week's episode of Constructed Criticism. Hello everybody and welcome to the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel. I'm Spencer. This is another Quest for 10 video. Today we're going to be talking about Esper Control. It's like the last deck on the Quest for 10 if I'm not mistaken. Maybe we haven't done one, but we're pretty close. So the Quest for 10 is my goal to get 10 wins with every major deck in Standard. And a major deck kind of qualifies in its own way. If you're a patron of Constructive Criticism, you can go to patreon.com/ccmtg, get access to the Google Doc where the decks that are qualified are actually listed there, as well as the notes along with my quest. So this week we're going to be doing Esper Control. Esper Control qualified by having a ton of top 8s and just being one of the best decks in Standard. The deck put up early results and just kind of has never slowed down. A lot of people are huge fans of the deck. This deck probably has more supporters than something like Jeskai Control last season ever did. And Jeskai Control was my favorite deck last season. So it's got a huge amount of support and a lot of people tuning the deck, working on it, trying to figure out how to best do things. So let's kind of go over my final list. So as we can see on the screen, we have 4 Absorb, 1 Cast Down, 4 Chemist's Insight, 2 Cry of the Canarium, 4 Dragon Catacombs, 4 Glacial Fortress, 4 Godless Shrine. We have 4 Hollowed Fountain, 1 Island, 4 Isolated Chapel, 1 Ixalan's Binding, 3 Kaya's Wrath, 2 Moment of Craving, 3 Mortify, 2 Negate, 1 Search for Iskanta, 1 Swamp, 2 Syncopate, 4 Teferi, 1 Eldritch Reborn, 2 Thought Erasure, 2 Vraska's Contempt, and 4 Watery Grave. Our sideboard consists of 2 more Cast Down, 3 Duress, 2 Hostage Taker, 1 Kaya's Wrath, 2 Lyra, 1 more Eldritch Reborn, and 4 Thief of Sanity. So let's talk about the main deck really quick. So the first thing that you'll notice is we have 26 lands. I think that between Search for Iskanta and the 2-mana discard spells, I think that you don't need 27 lands in this deck. And honestly, you kind of need a density of cards in your deck to win a lot of the games that you play. So 26 has been totally okay. Obviously, one of the things that could be missing here is a second Search for Iskanta because we're playing 26. It's entirely possible they actually do want the Search for Iskantas as well. So maybe cutting like a Syncopate could be something. If you're having trouble with 26 lands, you want a little bit more density in your deck of spells. A second Search for Iskanta could solve any problems that you have with the mana base. The thing about the mana base, though, that you'll notice is I don't have any spell lands in the deck. One of the reasons for this is the mana in this deck is actually quite bad. I don't really care what anybody says. Most of the games, if not all the games you lose, are to your mana. Because when you hit your mana, and your mana works perfectly, you have the best spells, you have answers to everything, and you just don't lose the game. So, for me, it's not really worth it to play extra tap lands to make my other lands come into play tapped, to lose percentage points in matchups, when I'm just going to win games where I can cast my spells, so I want my mana to be the best that it can be. So I'm not going to play any colorless lands, I'm not going to play Field of Ruin, I'm not going to play Arch, I'm not going to play tap lands like Memorial Genius. I think that this deck just wins by just having better cards than your opponent, so having a bunch of lands that actually weakens your matchup if they're not casting your spells on time. And for that reason, I don't think you should play any. Kind of next up, we have how the deck wins. So usually, the deck wins by your opponent conceding in game 1. Usually your opponent concedes long before you actually have the win locked up. However, if that doesn't happen, you're typically winning through Teferi ultimates, but more often than not, for me, it's actually just been whatever I get back from an Eldritch Reborn. Now, obviously that doesn't happen in the mirror. The mirror is a little bit more difficult to navigate, but for the most part, that's how you're going to win games of Magic. You're going to find something sweet with a Eldritch Reborn, you're going to get it back, and you're going to kill your opponent with it, because you just answer everything else that they've done. And sometimes that thing is, a Vraska or whatever. But, sometimes it's just like a 3/3. Sometimes it's like a Carnage Tyrant. Usually you win with the thing you get back from Eldritch Reborn, but even that sometimes just happens after a Teferi ultimate. And so understanding that that's how you're going to win game 1 is pretty important. Another thing that you can do that I don't have in this main deck that makes it way, way, way easier is either to play like a Karn or a Kaya, so that once you have that Teferi ultimate, you just like start making tokens or just winning through the Kayas. So that makes game one a lot easier, and you could certainly cut the Eldest Reborn to do something like that. The next thing that I kind of want to talk about is the key cards. So the first thing you'll notice is I'm playing Syncopate, and I'm playing 4 Absorb, and I'm playing 2 Negate. I actually think that this deck, despite what a lot of people are doing, which is playing as many discard spells as possible and things like that, and playing very, very few counter spells, I've seen lists that play only 3 Absorbs. I think that's wrong. I think that this deck is a reactive deck. I think that Syncopate is quite good in the deck, and I think that you should be playing as many counter spells as possible. In fact, my win percentage was actually pretty low before I added the Syncopates to the deck, if I'm not mistaken. Once I changed the list, I guess I only went 2-1 after I changed the list in the notes, but I kept playing the deck and got, I think, 3 or 4 additional wins right after that, after I started playing this list. So my win percentage with this list is much better than my win percentage without the Syncopates, and I think that they're very important and also really good in the mirror match and against some of the decks that you might run into, like Team of Reclamation and stuff like that. I think the next card that I want to talk about that I actually changed my mind on when I started playing more Cry of the Carnarium. Cry in the main deck is actually pretty good in this meta game. It deals with a lot of hard starts from your opponent to deal with because your mana is so bad and so painful at times against the aggro decks that just having a couple of these in the main deck is actually really helpful and something that I would highly recommend that you try out. Cry of the Carnarium in the main deck has changed matchups significantly and just made it so that I don't just auto-full to some starts from certain decks when my mana isn't cooperating in the way that I would like it to. Not to say that casting a black 1 card on turn 3 isn't difficult on your mana to begin with, but it also punishes your opponent for pressing you into that mana situation. So when they're overextending into a Cry of the Carnarium, you get to punish them for it. And that's really important. And then the key card number 3 that I would say is Absorb. This card, I've tried 3 of it, I've tried 4 of it. I think the card's just good. I think that it is just something that you should have 4 of. Obviously, I'm higher on counterspells. I actually moved things from my sideboard to put more counterspells in my main deck, things like that, and I'm a pretty big fan of it. I think that you should be playing the full 4 Absorbs. Hard counters are really important in this metagame, and Absorb is the best one. The next thing that we should probably talk about is the sideboard. As we kind of saw, we have the extra Eldest Reborn, the 2 Cast Down, the Kaya's Wrath, the Duress, the Thief of Sanity, the Hostage Taker. You get to transform into kind of an Esper mid-range deck in certain matchups, or just increase your density of threats in the control mirror and stuff like that. I'm a big fan of the sideboard. The only thing that I kind of like I said that I would consider changing from the list that I ended up on is maybe adding a Kaya somewhere in the 75. That card's been really good against me, and I have played lists with it with Matt Kling when he was playing the deck, and in the list that he loaded up, and I've been a pretty big fan of it. So maybe something like cutting the Eldest Reborn from the main for a Kaya kind of just increases your density of the things that you can do, the things that you can beat, the speed in which you can win games and stuff like that. But the sideboard overall is really good. I really like the Lyras. The 4 Thief of Sanity is really great. Because I moved the negates to the main deck, I added extra sideboard slots. The 3 Duress, just kind of MVP, and then the extra cast downs for things like Gruul and where you need to kill large creatures is really important. And then your main deck obviously has tons of great answers, right? You have the Vraska's Contempt and the Ixalan's Binding. You have the Mortifies. You have things that deal with threats, and then you kind of get free wins from different things. Like the Ixalan's Binding has won me a lot of games, but Vraska's Contempt wouldn't, and I highly recommend trying that out. The sideboard is pretty straightforward. Against certain decks, you're going to board in things like Hostage Taker, Thief of Sanity, and Lyra, or Eldest Reborn to try and become more of a mid-range deck, maybe against something like a control deck, or maybe bring in Thief of Sanity against people that board out their removal spells against you. Kind of stuff like that. Against aggro decks, I'm going to be honest, you're just trying to board in Lyra, Kaya's Wrath, Cast Down, and beat them. You have a lot of main deck answers to try and win those game ones, right? We have those main deck Cry of the Carnariums. We have those main deck Moment of Cravings. So your aggro matchup in game 1, you're actually pretty far ahead. And then kind of in game 2 against something like Simic Nexus, you're trying to figure out how many removal spells you can leave in to try and beat them. Because they're going to board in things like Ooze or like Mystic, and they're going to have things like the Hydroid Kratos and stuff like that. So you have to make sure that you leave in enough removal to beat them, while also making sure that you are beating their immediate game plan, their game plan to beat you. And And that's something to remember when you're sideboarding with this deck specifically. So my record overall with Esper in the quest was, I think, 10-5. I immediately, I think, won 3 or 4 matches right after this with the final list. And I tried a ton of lists in this deck. And the things that we really learned, I kind of mentioned at the beginning, is just your mana is really bad. And your mana is really bad with really good mana. The thing is that it's not that your mana is horrible, it's that your deck is consists of cards at lots of different mana costs, right? Moment of Craving, Cry of the Carnarium, Absorb. There's just so many double-colored spells or hard-to-cast spells in the deck. Mortify might tax your mana in a certain way, things like that. That the mana is rough, and that's why I don't think it's correct to play spell lands. The mono-blue matchup is one that I think that we should talk about. I'm not sure who's favored because I've won from both sides, and I also have felt not favored from both sides because I've lost from both sides too. And I honestly don't know which side is favored. I know some people think it's mono blue. I know some people think it's Esper. I think that honestly, it's just whoever understands the matchup and what their hand consists of and how the game's going to play out is going to be more favored in the end. So having a plan in that matchup is really important. And then I would also say that the deck is better than my record, which is, funny. Like 66% during the quest is pretty good. People should say, it was funny because I actually posted this on Twitter. People were like, you won 66% of your games. I don't think you complain. But it's like, well, I think that I'm better than 66% on Arena. Maybe I'm not. And I think that the deck itself is a little bit better than that. I do think that the deck, as it progressed, got a little bit better. Some changes were worse than others. But overall, I think that Esper Control was something that I'm glad that I tried out. I don't know that I like it that much as a deck. It feels like a curve-out control deck, which kind of sounds weird, right? Like, I play lots of curve-out decks, right? I like aggressive mid-range decks, and those decks curve out a lot, but I don't like it as much in the control strategies. I really like the flexibility and the aggressive game plans that something like Crackling Drake gave you in Jeskai Control, and this game just doesn't have that option. I don't get to pick when to turn the corner. In fact, the main deck just doesn't get to turn the corner, and that's something that a lot of people really enjoy, and I personally didn't. But that being said, the sideboard with this deck is really fun, right? You get to board in tons of creatures and really high impact cards in a lot of matchups. So that's kind of it for my thoughts for this deck. I would recommend trying out Esper. I think it's fun. If you really enjoy pure control, this is definitely a deck for you. Thank you everybody so much for watching. Go to patreon.com/ccmtg to get access to the notes for the quest for 10. And don't forget that you can join along too. There are lists, there are things available, and I would love to see people joining along in my quest for 10 and yours as well. So thank you everybody so much, and we'll see you guys all next week with another video on the Constructive Criticism Network.